Hi, everybody. So this week we're talking about decision making, which is a really important topic in terms of leadership. So as leaders, we are often making big decisions that have really big implications for not only ourselves, but for the people that work with us in our organizations, our teams. And those different situations are really based on different situations and different information. No typical decision making, no typical decision can be made twice. There's so many different factors that go into making a decision. Great leaders, though, are able to balance out this innate trait of emotion with reason and make sure that there's a positive outcome. And what I mean by that is we as just humans in general are emotional beings. We have so many emotions, and oftentimes we let our emotions get the best of us. Our emotions guide our decisions. Great leaders have to think more big picture. They have to take in all of the different factors into consideration and make sure that emotion isn't the driving force behind their decision. They are also the ones who chart the path forward in the decision-making process. They're the ones who lead. There may be other people who are involved in that process, but they're the ones who are in charge of making sure that decision-making process at least starts and sort of checking in as it goes along. So the first thing I want to start talking about is this decision-making process. Whether you know you're making a decision, with people, or you're just making sort of an informal decision, you are following a process. And again, we sort of consider this process to be both formal and informal. You'll follow it no matter what, whether you realize you are or not. So this is in fact the process. The decision-making process consists of 5 different steps. The first, define the problem, identify possible solutions, gather data or information, implement a decision or make a decision, and then lastly evaluate that decision. So what we'll do next is go through each of these stages just in a little bit more detail. So when we're talking about defining the problem, very self-explanatory, but what exactly is the problem? Figuring out all the different elements of that issue that you need to come to a decision on, and then you'll eventually act accordingly. The other thing that you should define at this stage is the time frame. When does a decision need to be made? Do you have lots of time? Is this a decision that needs to be made right then and there? And if so, how does that affect the decision-making process moving forward? The key in this is that if the problem isn't defined accurately at the very beginning of that process, then it creates an incorrect starting point for everything else moving forward. The next step is identifying possible solutions. So exploring all of the possible decisions that you can make and making some kind of list that has different ideas and different thoughts, gathering input from other people to figure out what are the options moving forward. In a group setting, it is really important to make sure that everyone feels part of that process, and so getting input from everyone is an important step as well. The next stage in gathering data and information is really making sure that you're able to make an educated decision and not just a decision, spur of the moment kind of decision. And in this, one of the strategies that oftentimes people will take is creating a list of pros and cons for each possible solution. And that way you're able to really see what are the benefits and drawbacks to going down whatever path you decide. In this step, one key element is to be critical of all of the possible decisions and not get tied to one off the back, and again, not letting emotion drive a decision. And lastly, being creative, making sure that you're really looking outside the box for the decisions, because oftentimes the best decisions are the ones that we don't think of off the bat. The next step is obviously making that decision, implementing your decision. And in this, it's really important to choose one, go with it, and stick with it. Make sure that you don't second guess yourself, because that doesn't help the next step moving forward. It doesn't help people move forward based on that decision. If you have time in order to make a decision, take the time to make that decision. There's nothing worse than rushing into something without taking all of the different factors into consideration. And it may not be an easy decision to make, and so taking the time will allow you an opportunity to make those decisions and make an educated decision. The last step here, consulting people if you need to. No one's in it alone, especially in an organization. There's often people who are able to give advice, and even people outside of an organization who can give advice on what approach or what steps to take. The last step is a really, really important part, and it really goes back to this idea of reflection, looking back and making improvements in the future, but evaluating your decisions. Here, it's important to let time pass and then go back and evaluate that decision and ask yourselves, did I make the right decision? In a more basic sense, did you just simply make the right decision? And if you did or didn't, what would you change? What went well, or what were things that could be changed to make the process better in the future? Here it's important to look at the big picture. Make sure that you see all of the different processes that go into making that decision, not focusing on minor issues, really looking at the big picture and seeing, were you successful as a whole? The last thing, were you satisfied in that decision? And then what adjustments do you need to make moving forward if it's necessary? So now that we've talked about that process of decision making, we now need to move on to the styles of decision making, and these are very similar to some of the leadership styles, but they sort of, again, are focused around decision making. So the 5 decision making styles that we're going to talk about are autocratic, democratic, collaborative, consensus, and convenience. Some of these are actually in the article, the Forbes article that you'll be reading later. Some of them are paired together, but these are the 5 decision making styles broken down a little bit more clearly. So the first step, or the first style of decision making, is autocratic decision making. And here we make decisions without consulting anyone. There's one leader, one person in charge, and they are the one responsible for the decision making process. We often see this type of leadership, or pardon me, this type of decision making in things like the military, where a decision is maybe life or death, and so it's important for one person, one voice to be in charge of that decision. Democratic decision-making is almost the exact opposite, where everyone is involved in the decision-making process and where a vote is taken, where the majority will eventually win. So it's great because it involves a number of people and allows those different opinions and perspectives to be heard. The next one is collaborative, and it's kind of a mix between democratic and autocratic. In the collaborative decision-making, the leader gathers a team, a group of people who have a certain expertise in an area, and requests feedback or insight. They know that they're not going to make that decision only on their own ideas, but they'll gather input and information from people around them, and then ultimately will come to make that final decision on their own. But it is with different perspective and ideas taken into account. The next style is consensus decision-making, and people often refer to consensus decision-making as a great blessing or a frustrating curse. And the key to this is that everyone can honestly agree on one decision, making sure that you have conversation until everyone agrees. The key is that not just sort of giving up. The key is convincing people that this is the best course of action to take so that they honestly agree. The last style of decision-making is one that's a little more abstract, and one that's a little more odd. But sometimes the best decision a leader can make is to not make a decision at all, or to completely delegate a decision to somebody else. It is a very odd type of decision making, but sometimes there's merit to this. And in the TED Talk that you'll watch this week, they speak specifically about this idea of convenience decision making and the benefits that it has. So that's all for this week. I'd encourage you to go back, finish the rest of the coursework for the week, and then work on this week's weekly assessment. If you have any questions, please let me know, but otherwise, have a great week.